Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is May 16th, 2025. Welcome to the podcast. I wanted to update you on the fact that I was on vacation and did not mention that I would be gone. So that's why we didn't have a Monday podcast. So now I'm back and refreshed. I want to talk about today the U.S. federal government policy on operating the government like a business. So, over my vacation, I heard not as much news as I normally do, but something that stuck out to me was the fact that there is a lot of pushback from various groups about the government making money, and specifically anytime the US president Donald Trump does a business deal with other countries to bring in more revenue, it feels like that people are just totally against it for lack of characterizing it any different. So I want to focus on some key players that I think are really against the the government, the federal government, being run like a business. The first one is nonprofits. 3 years ago, I remember that the nonprofits, especially some of the churches, were really trying to lobby Congress to get additional funding. And I don't want to get into the weeds on specifics of what they were asking for money for, but you can imagine because they're trying to bring in money and they're telling the federal government that they're using it to help people. Now, one thing that I always noticed about these nonprofits are that the salaries to their top tier people is very, very high. And they don't really do fundraising anymore to a level that would keep them from trying to get money from the federal government. And they're not they're not trying to get the federal government to generate any money either. They're trying to take more money away from the government. So since the Trump administration has been in the White House, you see less money going out for nonprofits. Now, there was a local group that puts on a LGBTQI program in the summer, and I noticed that they were getting money somehow through the federal government as well. And they were advertising for donations, and they aren't doing any fundraisers. So the nonprofits are not doing any fundraisers. They're heavily dependent on the government to generate revenue. Okay, Congress on spending. Congress, and it's been the last 20 years, probably longer, they want to spend money. As I've said in previous podcasts, they think that leadership equals giving people money. Now that's shifted now with the Trump administration of investing in the country with the agreement that we get our money back or at least some of it. Now, after the Clinton administration, that's when it seemed to change from loaning people money to giving people money and not generating any money for our own country to come back in. And yes, they were doing the aircraft deals even 20 years ago. I remember that. But as far as getting any other revenue coming into the country, Congress did not do that. And that's critical because why not make some money? Now, the first two blended with my government experience. So, over the years, when I was in the government, they seemed to want to spend, spend, spend. And one of the things that stood out to me was we used to call it end of year government spending. And we would have money left in our accounts coming from September. October 1st was when the new fiscal year started. And every year we would go out and buy things that our organizations needed that we really didn't need at all, just to spend the money. And I was just so fascinated by that. Now, the blend between the running the government like a business and that is critical. Why not return the money that's not used? Because actually, there were people in the federal government, senior managers, who were good at having a great budget, and then they still had money left over at the end of the year. But they couldn't give the money back. They had to spend it. Why? And this is urban legend territory now, because I never saw anything written, any statute, federal statute, that said why we had to spend all of the money. The urban legend was that if you didn't spend the money, you wouldn't get as much money the next year. They would cut your budget. So they were trying to get you to project how much money the organization would spend. So I never knew if that was true or not. And in all of that time, it was 20 years of military service, and then 20 years as a government civilian. The what I saw was that there was no incentive to give the money back. I was in an organization, a contracting organization, where we generated money. We charged customers, which were other government agencies, 1% or 2% fee for services. That organization had money. They had enough money to pay salaries, because I got to know some of the people in the financial part of that. And I wondered, well, why can't other organizations do that? And in this contracting organization, they could have generated money and then funded other government agencies. So that is interesting that it went against the grain for the government to bring in any revenue. The other side note is the top 2%. I've always seen this where they'll do interviews on TV and say, well, I wouldn't mind paying in more. And the government should try to bring in revenue so people don't pay all of the taxes. To date, none of the top 2 percenters that I have seen that have been on TV have given any more money. The person who stood out was Warren Buffett. He said this maybe 20 years ago. He said, well, I should be paying in more. I make more. And to date, as an example, he hasn't paid in any more money. But the blend with the government making money, well, people like the Warren Buffetts who are in the top 2% are making all of this money. And the transition is we have a president now who was in business and we're getting deals. And we've come full circle with this idea of why can't the federal government bring in revenue? How are we going to do it? You can do it through tariffs. You can do it through selling other countries some of our resources, like our knowledge on how to make fighter jets. So President Trump is over in the Middle East now, and after about 4 or 5 days there, he's probably generated $6 or $7 billion of revenue that will come back to the U.S. And I was struck that the mainstream media wasn't talking up the fact that he was bringing money into the country. And like I keep saying, if we're bringing in revenue, we should reach the point where we're not paying taxes. If you're bringing in revenue, and what's wrong with bringing in revenue so that your taxpayers don't have to pay more in taxes? Like I said, the mainstream media, they're dissecting everything that this guy's doing. And in this particular case, they are subtly criticizing him for not visiting the Europeans first and talking to them about giving more U.S. taxpayer dollars so that they can fund things like NATO, like food programs for the UN and all of that stuff. Because the bottom line on all of this stuff is if you run the federal government like a business and you're generating revenue in these other countries, for example, and let me say humans, use that word. We're all humans. If humans are generating revenue in their own country and they can buy things, they can sell to other people, this whole idea of making your own money so that you can take care of your family and get off of being in debt, and also transition from the United States giving money endlessly to countries and even internally of, I mentioned the nonprofits, of generating their own revenue to help the people that they're trying to help. And it's this addiction to the federal government role of just endlessly giving away taxpayer dollars that is the real issue that needs to be talked about. The federal government should be able to generate revenue to get our taxes lower so that we can use the money to do other things to enrich our own lives. This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Let me know what you think.